Her husband said she was too old and gave her to a slave as punishment. But that night, there was no humiliation, no submission. That night, the quietest revolution in history began. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Lena Becker was untangling her knotted hair with a comb, not looking at her reflection in the mirror, but beyond it. In the mirror, there were only lines, dullness, and silence. But beyond that, stood the woman she thought might have once existed, faded but still alive, broken but not yet shattered. She was nearing 40. For her husband Thomas, she was already old goods. My old farm wife, he called her now, sometimes even in front of guests. Laughing. Each time, Lena froze a little more inside. Her hands were resting on her knees, eyes on the worn fabric of her nightgown. There was still dirt under her fingernails. She had worked in the garden that day, but got no thanks, not even a glance. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, muddy boots still on, chewing his steak like it was his enemy. But really, he wasn't even there. Head full, mouth full, but heart empty. When she heard footsteps cutting through the silence of the night, Lena flinched. It was Marcus. He'd been brought to the farm a few years ago. Strong, quiet. His steps seemed to cut through the air before even touching the ground. Thomas spoke without looking up. "You're finally going to be useful today." The words hit Lena in the stomach. What did that mean? After draining his wine glass in one gulp, Thomas turned to Marcus. "Tonight, she's yours. Take her. She's not mine anymore." First came silence. Then Marcus met Lena's eyes. He said nothing. His face showed no triumph, no disgust. Just a steady look, like someone doing a job. Lena didn't say anything at first. She didn't resist either. But she felt something spark inside her in the dark, not just shame or fear. It was something like awakening. Thomas's smile grew more twisted, like he'd hit two birds with one stone, humiliate her and dump his anger onto Marcus. The air was colder as they walked to the barn. The silence of the night was no longer silent. Inside, a dim lamp glowed. Marcus was carving something out of wood in a corner, as if Lena hadn't even entered. To him, it was just a piece of wood in that room. "There's a blanket over there," he said. His voice was soft, but tension ran through every word. Lena walked to the corner, reached for the blanket, but didn't sit right away. She leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling. "I know why you're here," Marcus said. "Tell me," Lena whispered. "Because if I say no, he'll chain me up." Lena lowered her head. He hadn't touched her, but something had already settled deep inside. In his eyes, she had become an object. Marcus spoke again. "I won't touch you." This time, Lena replied, "I know." For a while, neither of them said a word. Just the crackling of the lamp, the distant moan of the wind, and the quiet resistance of their hearts. For the first time, Lena could sit next to a stranger without being afraid of the silence. She didn't sleep that night, but it wasn't a tired kind of sleeplessness. It felt like something inside her was starting to take shape. By morning, Lena was still sitting under the blanket. Marcus had already gone, but on the ground, where he had lain, the warmth still lingered. When Lena touched that warmth, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, kindness had been given to her without being asked for. But their story wouldn't end there. Because Thomas hadn't done this just to punish her. He had something darker, more dangerous in mind. And that morning, Lena made a decision for the first time. She wouldn't just survive. She'd take it all back. Who she was, what she felt, and who she didn't belong to. At dawn, Marcus pushed open the side door of the barn and stepped outside. The moon was still hanging in the sky, but it was about to give way to the red glow of the sun. The cool wind on his face made the words from the night before catch in his throat. He had never been someone who questioned orders because to him, every order was just another link in the chain. But this time, the chain sounded different. This time, the chain was rusty. It smelled like blood. Lena was watching him from the barn door. Tired, but standing. For the first time in years, there wasn't just a line on her forehead, there was a decision. There was no violence in Marcus's silence. But there was something else. Like a shelter within the silence, like soil cracked, but still fertile. Things felt different in the house. Thomas, eyes burning from a sleepless drunken night, stared at the empty bottles, waiting for Marcus to return. But no words that came could satisfy the power in his mind. Because to him, Lena was no longer a wife. Not even property, she was a loss. And Marcus was going to be blamed for everything he had lost. That morning, while Marcus was in the barn arranging the feed, Thomas suddenly stepped behind him. "Had a good time?" he asked sarcastically. Marcus didn't reply. "The woman, still worth anything?" This time Marcus lifted his head. "You gave me an order. I didn't follow it." The words were sharper than a whip. Thomas clenched his fists. The hate in his eyes no longer hid. For 2 days, Thomas didn't say a word to Lena. He only beat her down with his eyes. To Marcus, he gave new chores just to drain more of his strength, to wear him out so hard that his sweat would leave marks on every inch of soil. But Lena noticed. Marcus's shoulders never slumped, and his eyes never looked away. Each day he worked in silence, but with honor. Then one afternoon, as the sky turned to lead, Lena slowly walked to the barn. She carried a bowl of warm soup and wore a simple headscarf. Marcus was sitting on the ground, carving another piece of wood. The shape was unclear this time, but the focus in his hands was not. "I brought you something to eat," Lena said, her voice low but firm. "Thank you," Marcus said, nodding. Lena set the soup down not right next to him, but a bit farther. Then she sat. Neither of them spoke. "Thomas is jealous of you," Lena said at last. "No," Marcus replied. "He just hates losing." "Losing me. Losing control." That night, another kind of bond formed in the quiet. Not with words, but in the steam of the soup, in the wood shavings falling as he carved, in the soil gathered on Lena's knees. She was no longer just a woman being ignored. And Marcus was no longer just a worker swallowing it all. Maybe there wasn't love between them yet, but there was respect. And respect is where many wars begin. Before Lena woke up the next morning, a wagon pulled onto the muddy road outside the farm. 3 men got out, Thomas's friends, or strangers who shared his poisonous views. They carried guns. One proudly showed off a scar on his forehead, the other spat when Marcus's name was mentioned. Thomas welcomed them in, closing the door with a creak. At that very moment, Lena shivered in her bed. She hadn't heard anything yet, but she felt that something was about to change. While cleaning the barn, Marcus heard the voices. He looked through the window and saw the men. He turned his head away and quietly gathered his tools. He touched the small piece of knife he kept hidden in a drawer, not to protect but to decide when the time came. That evening, Thomas shouted for Lena. "You're staying outside tonight." "What do you mean?" "I've got guests. I'm not letting you in." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. Marcus watched from a distance. And in that moment, he made his decision. He would no longer just follow orders. This time, he would stand up not for Lena, but for himself. Because some chains need to be broken before they rust. And that night, the silence was on the edge of turning into a scream. She didn't wave the knife around. She just made a sound loud, firm. "Back off, or I'll cut your throat." The fury in her voice broke through years of silence. The men froze. Marcus got to his feet. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Thomas realized he had lost them both. "You brought this on yourselves," he shouted. "No," Lena said. "You made us this way." Thomas stepped back, but his pride wasn't dead yet. "This isn't over," he said. Marcus stared him down. "We know it's not, but we're not the same anymore." The men pulled Thomas back, dragging their injured friend as they left the barn. Silence fell. But this silence wasn't born of fear. It was born of victory. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. Neither could Marcus. But for the first time, the lack of sleep didn't tire them. Because they both knew. The night can be dark, but fire can still be lit in the dark. The sky was gray the next morning. It wasn't raining, and the sun wasn't shining either. It was as if even nature was trying to process what had happened, holding its breath, waiting. Lena stood at the doorway, watching the heavy clouds settle over the land. She hadn't slept since the night before, but her eyes didn't look tired, they looked alive. Her hands were folded over her apron. For the first time, they weren't shaking. The barn was still quiet. Marcus was inside, with bruises from the night on his shoulders, but he was standing. He had picked up the unfinished wooden bird again. When Lena came in, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. She brought a small bowl of herbal tea, handed it to him with her own hands. As Marcus took it, his fingers touched hers. Their eyes both said the same thing. "We're alive." But being alive wasn't enough. Thomas wasn't around that morning. He had probably gone into town maybe to plot something new. or maybe just to drown his pride in alcohol. But in his absence, the house quietly breathed, and that breath warmed Lena from the inside for the first time. That day, Lena followed Marcus. They repaired the broken fence in the garden together. When their hands met while aligning two wooden planks, a current passed between them. Love still had no name, but it was moving. And with every hammer strike, another seed of something they were building together fell into the soil. But the outside world wasn't just watching silently. The town was a place that could smell gossip from miles away. When Lena went down to the market, all eyes were on her. Women avoided eye contact. Men fell silent. Children backed away. Nothing was said, but everything was said. Delilah Meyer, the church's head assistant, clenched her jaw and muttered as Lena passed, "God is watching you." Lena raised her head. "I hope he is," she said, "because no one else is looking." Marcus's name was now only spoken in whispers. That man, the stranger, the filth, the threat. And Lena was mentioned with him. The woman who ran from her owner. In everyone's mind, the crime was the same. They were together. And if they were together, then there had to be guilt. It didn't take long for Thomas to find out. Before he even returned that evening, the whispers echoing through the town shops had already reached his ears. With his last drink of the night, he made a decision. He was no longer just a humiliated husband, he was now a man sworn to revenge. Later that night, when he returned home, he found Lena sitting at the doorstep. The light was coming from the barn where Marcus stayed. Thomas stopped. "A woman like you," he said, "doesn't deserve respect even in the shadows." Lena didn't respond. "You humiliated me," he shouted. "You humiliated yourself," Lena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but her words hit like a slap. Thomas lunged forward, raising his arm, but this time, he didn't bring it down. Because behind him stood a shadow. Marcus's shadow. Silent, but solid like a mountain rising from the earth. Thomas turned. Their eyes locked. "I'm not done with you," Thomas said. "You didn't buy me with money," Marcus replied. "What about the woman? Didn't I buy her too?" Lena stepped in. "I was never sold. Just forgotten." Thomas stepped back, for the first time looking like he was afraid of something. But this fear was mixed with a rage laced with a strange sort of awe. "The town will remember you soon," he said to Lena. "And this time, they'll ask, 'Who are you walking with?'" The next morning, Lena didn't go to church. Marcus didn't stay on the farm. Together, they walked toward the edge of the far woods. In silence, hands didn't touch, eyes didn't lock, but their footsteps matched in rhythm. They stopped in a clearing between the trees. Marcus slowly took something out of his pocket, a small wooden spoon. He had carved Lena's initials into the handle. She reached out and took it. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just bowed her head and bit her lip. As Marcus turned and looked into the forest, Lena gently touched his shoulder. "Don't stop making spoons," she said. "Why not?" "Because one day, these hands should carry flowers too, not just thorns." Marcus turned, and for the first time, a smile formed on his face. Not the smile of someone surviving, but of someone choosing to live. But that smile would fade by nightfall. Because with the night didn't just come the darkness. It came with the sound of hooves. And this time, Thomas wouldn't be coming to the farm alone. The sound that came in the middle of the night wasn't the wind. It wasn't an owl hooting or mice scurrying on the barn roof. This sound was something else, footsteps of revenge, growing heavier with each step on the ground. When Lena looked out the window, she saw 3 shadows walking side by side in the dark. One was Thomas. The other 2 were men from town, men whose names she didn't even want to mention. They were carrying guns, and their faces were darker than the night. Marcus hadn't slept yet. Lena hadn't spent the night in the barn with him, but her heart was there. She didn't think twice as she stared at the shadows. She reached for the old shotgun beside the lantern, slung it over her shoulder, but there was no gunpowder. Only silence and courage. There was no knock. The door was pushed open directly. When the barn door creaked open, Marcus was already standing. No shirt on, hands bare, but eyes alert. When Thomas entered, he had a wild grin on his face. "Getting ready to run?" "No," said Marcus. "I was just ready." One man held the door. The other gripped a cord in his hand. "Tie him up," said Thomas. Marcus stepped back, and his shadow stretched giant across the wall in the lantern light. "Do you really think I won't stop you no matter what you do?" Thomas chuckled. "No, Marcus. That's not why we're here." Footsteps were heard outside. Lena was walking faster than the wind. She wasn't holding a torch, but there was fire in her eyes. When she stepped inside, Marcus was being pinned down, the men's hands on his belt. Thomas's eyes locked on hers. "Let him go," Lena shouted. "What right do you have barging into this house?" "This is my house," said Thomas. "But you're not anymore." Lena tried to walk toward Marcus, but the man shoved her. She fell, her knees sinking into the dirt, her hands bleeding, but her gaze didn't fall. Marcus yelled, "Don't touch her." Thomas leaned down. "When did you become her protector?" Marcus clenched his teeth. "I gave her love. What you couldn't do in 10 years, I did in one night. I saw her." His words were like knives. The man swung his fist at Marcus in anger. Marcus turned his head, but the blow was too fast to dodge. His cheek burst, blood ran from his lip, but his eyes stayed on Lena. Just then, a sound came from outside. Horses neighed. Someone shouted, "Stop!" It was a young boy, Jonas, son of Shepherd Henry, someone they knew from town. He was holding something in his hand. "I told the town," he yelled. "They're trying to lynch the woman." The men paused. Thomas grew angry. "This doesn't concern you, boy. But the town isn't just watching anymore. It was talked about at church this morning. Even the pastor is questioning what you really stand for." Thomas's face turned red. The other men hesitated for a moment. Marcus slowly got up from the ground. His eyes were steady. "If you ever touch Lena again," he said, "this land won't just bury crops, it'll bury regret too." Thomas lunged forward, but one of his men grabbed his arm. "That's enough," he said. "This won't stay quiet like we thought." For the first time, Thomas was losing control, not just over his wife, but over the men around him. That night, they left. Marcus's face was full of bruises, but as Lena cleaned them with a cold cloth, he didn't flinch, because the pain felt like the birth pangs of a new beginning. Lena rested her head on Marcus's chest. "We won't run anymore," she said. "I know," Marcus replied. "And if they come again, then we'll stand together." That night, the lantern in the barn didn't stay lit until morning. But the darkness inside no longer held fear. It held hope, and the world outside was no longer just a silent witness, because that small town had seen the quiet yet dignified resistance of two people. And sometimes a revolution doesn't start with guns, but with the patience dripping from a wounded man's eyes. The morning came as if nothing had happened. Birds were singing, the wind was gently blowing, and the earth was breathing quietly. But the farm was no longer the same. When Lena opened the window, the air smelled different. Fear had left, and in its place came an unexplainable emptiness. Her eyes searched for Marcus. The man walking out of the barn had bandages on his shoulders, bruises on his face, but he carried pride in his steps. That morning, they only looked at each other, because some feelings choke on words. By noon, Marcus was saddling the horse. Lena sat on the steps, holding a cloth bag in her hands. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To the sheriff's office," Marcus said. "There's still a confrontation missing." Lena stood up. "You're not going alone." They walked to town center. With every step, more eyes were on them. But this time, the looks weren't full of disgust, they were mixed with admiration. Because everyone knew, a woman had endured, a man had stayed silent, and together, they were rebuilding their lives with one single word: honor. At the sheriff's office, when Marcus knocked, the voice from inside sounded reluctant. "Come in." When the door creaked open, the sheriff looked up. "I've been expecting you," he said. "Thomas didn't file a complaint, but he's been talking plenty." Lena stepped forward. "We didn't commit a crime. I've been trying to explain that to people," the sheriff said. "But folks are used to secondhand talk." Marcus pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "This is my freedom paper. I've kept it for years. Never showed it to anyone. But now I need to leave proof behind." The sheriff looked over the document. He nodded. "This paper makes you free," he said. Marcus leaned back. "I already was. But now the town will know too." Lena closed her eyes. Something cracked inside her. It wasn't just a burden lifting. For the first time, the voice she'd held back for years whispered her name. "I'm here too." That night, when they returned to the farm, Lena paused at the doorway. Marcus stood behind her. "Is this house ours now?" she asked. "Wherever we go, that's ours," Marcus said. The next morning, they started clearing a small space behind the house. Marcus built a new porch. Lena planted onions, basil, and mint with her own hands. Days passed. When Delilah turned her head away at church, Lena smiled. Because now, she didn't trust other people's looks, she trusted her own steps. And that spring, A great fire broke out in town. Marcus and Lena ran to help, grabbing buckets from the barn. When the fire was put out, everyone clapped for them. Quietly, but they clapped. Then one day, Lena came out to the front yard and saw Marcus carving something. It was a new bird. But this time, its wings were open. "It's flying," she said. Marcus nodded. "Because now we can fly too." A year later, someone knocked on their door. Standing in the rain was a soaked woman and a little girl beside her. Fear on the woman's face. Hunger in the child's eyes. Without hesitation, Lena opened the door. "You're soaked," she said. "Come inside." From that moment on, their house wasn't just a house. It became a shelter. Everyone who came was given a warm plate, a dry blanket, and a story listened to without interruption. Marcus built a workshop. He made birds, spoons, chairs, and under each piece, he carved two letters, L and M. Lena and Marcus. One day, a child from town watching them asked, "Are you two married?" Marcus smiled. "We're together." Lena smiled too. And sometimes, that's more than a ring. The story of a woman once given away as punishment and a man once silenced to the point of silence had now taken root in other lives. And maybe one day, when people remember this house, they'll say, "This is the house of love." Its name was forbidden, its shape unconventional, but its spirit was more right than the whole world. Because love wasn't born in their hands, but it lived in them. The Yindi were just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,500 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time.